Good evening. How are you this evening? Okay, first off, I want to know who's a student in here. Angela, you can turn around and see all these students. These Angela, are the smartest of the smart. Because they're here at Western New Mexico University and not at ASU. We'll talk about that in just a second. Angela Ellsworth is who we're going to have this evening, but before we get on to her introduction, I need your help with something. Something very important happened today. Very important happened today, and I need your help. 87 years ago, Edwina Milner was born. So if you could do me just the kindest of favors, let's sing Happy Birthday. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Edwina. Happy birthday to you. Now, for the students in the audience, this is the couple here, Edwina and her husband, Charlie, who just does whatever Edwina tells him to do. That's his goal in life. A couple days ago, they celebrated their 64th anniversary. 64 years. And for the students in here, they met at the University of Texas. Now, we don't talk about Longhorns in here very much, just like Sun Devils, right? But, you know, romance bloomed and away they went, and here we are 64 years later. But the beauty of their story, of course, is Charlie was ultimately the working oil man, so to speak. He had a company, etc. But Edwina, she was the person who believed so strongly in the arts. And we had a little reception the other night, and what was it? 7% of artists back in the 19... Women artists. And that was 19 when? Oh, in the museums. Only 7%, when she was going through college, etc., were women artists. And the goal with what we're trying to do here with the Women's in Art lecture series, and it's sponsored by the Milners. A couple years ago, a person by the name of Linda Kay, some of you know Linda Kay Jones, said, hey, I got this wonderful couple, and they're very interested in the arts, and in particular promoting women in the arts. Can we do something? And so we sat down, we had a conversation. Through their generosity, they are trying to make a difference. Now the good news is they have another 90 years to go, so we got plenty of time. We got plenty of time. In terms of what it means to be an artist, but equally, perhaps more importantly, what does it mean to be a woman artist? Us guys, yeah, we can say whatever we'd like to say, but I see a lot of the students in here are female. And promoting and helping and moving forward women in the arts is so important. Lee Gruber is in my opinion, one of those women here. For those of you who don't know Lee, obviously the tile place, artwork is what that's all about. And she's brought, of course, in the summertime, the Clay Festival. Faye McCalmont. Faye McCalmont's another one, the Memories Regional Arts Council. So maybe not an artist herself doing drawing, but promoting art. Yeah. Just does an amazing job with murals around town. Where was your last mural?
We're working on the CDC one for the Visitor Center right now.
Visitor Center. Go across the bridge. Go down to the buildings down there. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful artwork. And I can keep going around in terms of the women who are in here. I see some of our professors in the back. This is what it's about. Get to know them. This is what this lecture series is about. But it's really not about talking about me. I do want to introduce a very special person tonight. Angela comes from Phoenix. I mentioned to you Arizona State University, where she happens to be a professor in their School of Art. But she's done other things too. She's created the Museum of Walking. She's going to talk a little bit about that. Her artwork you're going to see later on this evening. After the lecture, go over to the gallery. Two good things happen to you there. First, you're going to see a very inspirational show. It's a show that has, in my mind, a sense that can touch your soul as you get to hear about it, which you're going to get to hear about first, and then you'll go over there. But it's also a chance for you to get something to eat, because we'll have a reception there as well. So I knew you'd want that. Okay, that's the only reason why you came. But ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed such a fantastic pleasure to introduce to you Angela Ellsworth.
Tough act to follow, Dr. Shepard. Seriously, you're a performer, really. President, performer. So I'm really happy to be here for many different reasons. Number one, everyone in Silver City is super nice. Number two, I got to meet and talk with some fantastic students this morning in the gallery in the installation that I did. And the questions were smart, they were insightful, and they also challenged me. They challenged me in some ways that makes me think about my work in a new way, which is excellent. For an artist to get feedback from people, it means a lot. You know, once you're not in school anymore, you're not getting that kind of critical feedback. So I loved your bravery, and the questions that you asked were great. I want to thank a few people before I begin. Definitely want to thank immensely Charles and Edwina Milner and the Women in the Arts lecture series. I feel so honored to be a part of this series. You'll see why. My work is about women being invisible, about bringing women to the forefront, about acknowledging women. So I feel like this is a perfect fit for me to be here, and I'm really honored to be able to have that gorgeous gallery, 3 spaces, to kind of figure out how the work would talk to each other. A challenge as well, so I was in there for 2 days working. And I also want to thank Faye McCalmont, who invited me to come here, and she's the person that I've been basically communicating with, and we both have really busy schedules, so it was like, it's almost like we trusted like it was all going to happen, but there were long gaps of silence between our emails because we're busy. And anyway, she was just so great in taking care of me and being here. And then I also want to thank Stacy. Where's Stacy? Stacy Heim, who was incredibly patient with me in the gallery. The labels, you know, I didn't get my labels to her soon enough, and so she was the last minute typing and cutting and making everything look beautiful with the lights, and I really thank you so much. And I also want to say that Charles and Edwina you're an inspiration. Edwina, you're an artist, you're a creative in the world, you're a woman artist, and you're a philanthropist, and you're generous, and you're part of a lineage that I feel very much a part of. And I hope that my partner and myself one day can be as generous as you are to other young female artists as well. So thank you for that. All right. That's a person trying to get through the screen. One of my performances. Okay. So, I'm gonna resituate. Oh yeah. There we go. Okay. So, oh yeah, you know that. You know all that stuff. So I wanted to start with a quote by an artist, a very traditional artist, Paul Klee, surrealist painter. And when I took my first drawing classes with teachers that were actually teaching me something about drawing, not just saying, go do it, they were often quoting Paul Klee. And this particular sentence really has stuck with me, I think, since I was probably 19, 18 years old when I was in art school. A drawing is a line going for a walk. And somehow the notion of a line going for a walk, I started to understand how a drawn line making work connects to the body, that there isn't such a separation. And I've kept that with me, and that definitely is part of the inspiration for the Museum of Walking, is thinking of these dots, figures, people who are dots, kind of making lines on the landscape. And so today, what I'm going to talk about are lines, and lines made in the landscape, but also traditional object art lines, and then lines made in the landscape. This is from the Museum of Walking. Making art is one way of listening to the world. Walking is another. And also lineage, some art lineage, and also my own family history growing up in Utah as a Mormon, in a Mormon family. So we'll come back to those in a little bit. But I want to also give you some sense, because who's seen the show? Oh, just a few of you. Okay. So if you've seen the show already, and then you go back, I think it'll be interesting for you. For those that haven't seen the exhibition, you're going to get all the background, like how do I arrive at this work that I'm making now, or that you're going to see over there. And I think, so you won't see a whole lot of the work that's in this lecture over there, but you'll understand why those things are there and what they're trying to communicate. So I just want to talk about a solo show I had at a museum in 2000. And I had just recently moved. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Is it popping or, okay. So I just moved to Arizona from the East Coast. I never thought in a million years I would return to the West. You know, I left Utah and went to school, and then went to school again and lived in Europe. And then suddenly I'm back in the Southwest. And it was surprising to me. And I, had no real, I was there for some sort of health reasons. And I started noticing that more people seemed to be going to fitness clubs than they were going to museums. And we have incredible museums in Phoenix. So I started thinking about those two institutions. Both institutions revolve around ideas of beauty. Okay, so aesthetics in a museum, and then beauty, like body, beauty, culture. They both are places that are filled with things that we want, or things that we desire to be, right? So also they survive on memberships. You have to go, the gym, you have a membership, they take your money every month. The museum's nice and they don't do that, but you give them something. They thrive on membership. That's how they get their funding to operate. So I decided to I was offered a show at the ASU Art Museum, which is a lovely space, and I decided to turn it into a fitness club. And that if I turned it into a fitness club, maybe more people would come to the museum. It was called Club Extra. I was Angie, the fitness coordinator. I did not teach classes, but I did get people from local gyms to come in and bring their ball class or like their step class. So they were teaching classes in the museum. Yoga classes, all of that. And that was interesting. So I had to kind of schmy around in different fitness clubs, and I'd go take a class, and I'd see that the choreography, the folks that have stuck together for a long time, visually, like, they're really good. They're like a chorus line, with the ball, and they go every week, and they get their spot. So they did that same thing in the museum. They were totally open to it, and so they had an audience. I also had cardio equipment. So I collected cardio equipment. It's pretty much a study, maybe a graveyard for cardio equipment. I lived in an apartment. I like giving you little details, like the real things, right? So I lived in an apartment, and we had like no big budget for this museum show. So I had to find this stuff. Now, people generally want to give away equipment. Like, they've got it sitting around in their garage. I'm sure, who knows someone who has a piece of equipment that's sitting around, it's in the living room, it's holding towels. Right, and do you use it all the time? No, it does other things. It takes on a new use value. So, people in the classifieds were like, you come get it, you can have it. And then I had a rule that I'd never pay more than $10 for one of these things. So a lot of them were broken, and I learned to fix, and the tethers, it was a crazy scene. So, and I stored them all on my patio. Stacked, a patio where the neighbors could see down. But then they came out. So this is the ball class. And for the opening night, everyone that was invited to come, they were invited to come to the opening of Club Extra, and that they were also given a temporary membership card. So they had a little special card with the name on it. And they were encouraged to wear workout clothes and come ready to work out and all that. Well, it was interesting. Well, we had a DJ, so there was a DJ mixing live to all the classes, which was probably a little hard for the classes, but that was really cool. And the people who came like in 80s gear and all, you know, the headbands, and like some people really got into it. And then the people that didn't, that were couldn't get out of their arty ways, were completely left out. It was really interesting. They were like all in black and looking for the Chardonnay and, you know, something to snack on. And we had like towel girls and towel boys and Cliff Bars and Gatorade. And so the people that didn't decide to engage with the piece were sort of on the periphery, because people could work out on all that equipment. Some of it sort of broke along, you know, the night. But they were encouraged to go sweat. So my secret desire was to change the atmosphere in a museum, to be able to touch what is there, to sit on it, to sweat on it, to maybe even create like some kind of armpit smell in the space. So people worked out for probably 2.5 hours, and it did get sweaty. Whoa, I think my JPEGs are fading. So this is just to continue along this line of the body and movement. Drawing on breath was a project I did. I taught high school. I helped start a performing and visual arts high school in Phoenix, Arizona. And I taught the life drawing classes. And then I was also having a solo exhibition in a gallery. And I said to my students, because they were awesome, it was an art school, so we had nude models, and they were quite good at working with the figure. And so I asked this class, I said, would you be willing to work with me this semester, and we're gonna have the model moving the whole time? So they would practice like with the body moving. They're like, oh yeah. And I said, then you're gonna be in the exhibition. And they're like, yeah, that's cool. So I had models come in, and I had all this leftover exercise equipment. So some of it I kept, and my plan was to just have the models get on the bike to move, or be on a stair climber and move, and so the students could get used to something not being static. And this is the little funny story, is that I forgot to tell the model that they didn't need to take their clothes off. So just, you know, you get into a routine with the model, and then, you know, they come in and they get ready, and they, you know, you do they just know how you want to work with them. But this time, the model came out, this guy comes out, and he has all of his clothes off, and is on the stair climber, like before I can say anything. Now you have to understand, these are high school students. High school, who all their parents have said, yes, my child can see nude bodies for drawing or whatever. But I just about lost it. I mean, I was like, no, this is not happening. And I had to keep a completely straight face. Like, if I lost it or cracked a smile, over. Like, all of that is over, and then there's a shame situation. So I was just straight faced the whole time. This is totally normal, right? So when they came, this is part of the gallery. There were 3 rooms, and I had drawing benches all painted white. Each student had one piece of paper, and they had a piece of charcoal and a cloth and some Gatorade. And a very well-known triathlete was running on the treadmill. He ran a marathon on the treadmill in the middle of the space. And he's someone that I went to undergraduate school with, and he does like triple Ironman and wins them. He's one of those, you know, swim an ocean and bike a nation, and, you know, I mean, it's crazy. That's like 3 marathons in a row and whatever. So he has an amazing, you know, he's very strong, and so he agreed to come from New York. He trains in a gym, and he agreed to come from New York to do this project. And so the students all drew as he ran, and they did it for 2.5, almost 3 hours, and no break. and they had to use the same piece of paper, and it was such an incredible experience for everyone. We didn't, these kind of things you don't rehearse. You just have to be very well planned and then kind of give it up to chance. We didn't know that the treadmill was going to move forward crazy and slide on the ground, but there he is running. And then people that were coming to the opening just kind of mingled around. And what happened there is the students and the runner, they all had a heightened sense of space and of sound, because they weren't talking, and the rhythm of the treadmill, and then they were hearing things beyond the gallery. They were all talking about it afterwards, and I was like, you guys, like, don't seem like you're okay. You seem like you're high or something, and like your parents are out there. So get normal. Like, I don't know. They were like, whoa, did you hear that train? Did you, this, like so the sense is being heightened in the process of something happening over and over and over again was really interesting to me. And then this is a little bit of a leap, but that's my partner, Tanya Patan. And so this is now moving on to kind of walking stuff, but also lineage. So my partner and I were living in Los Angeles, and she's a writer, playwright, and it was not legal. We wanted to get married, so she proposed, and it's like, well, where are we gonna go? She's Jewish, but not really. I mean, bagel Jew, she says, and I was raised Mormon, and they're never gonna let me back in. So, what are the options? So we decided to create our own rituals, which were sort of wonderful. And so I made a ring on a map from the house we were living in Koreatown, and then a dot on the map at Tiffany's and Company in Beverly Hills, which I'd never been into a Tiffany's. It's like the all-American jewelry, I guess. So I walked the northern part of the ring on the map, and she walked the southern route, and it was a walking meditation on each other and our love for each other. And then when we got to Tiffany's and Company, we told everyone in the shop that we were getting married. And then, of course, they wanted to sell us rings, and we didn't have enough money. And I didn't think far enough to realize that I didn't have a plan to get home. So we took a bus down Wilshire. Anyway, so then we came back to Phoenix, and this is the place is a term that's in Utah. Brigham Young came out, and he puts this stick in the ground, says, this is the place for our people, for the Mormon territory. So I like playing with that and this idea of finding place, like, where do I belong? Is this the place? And during this time, so we weren't legally married, and then there were all these propositions and Prop 8 and all of that happening, and it seemed like, especially in Arizona, there was no way. They were doing everything to kind of keep us from ever, not just us, but any gay or lesbian queer couple from getting married. So we were doing these love walks to Mormon temples, and dressed in very cute outfits, 6-inch fringe. We got the little Western thing going on. And then we had our hand carts, which is sort of a traditional Mormon thing. And the images and pictures from our relationship were in photo albums and in that blue box that we would share with people if they wanted to see them. So we've done only one half of that walk. And I think I was wearing a T on mine. She had an A. And then we went across the street from the LDS temple in Mesa. Of course, we couldn't go in, but we shared vows, another ritual that we had to make up, shared vows on the property. We thought it was going to be really political, and they were going to, like, arrest us and stuff. Nothing like that happened. Nothing. In fact, it was really pleasant and pretty, and the grounds were pretty, and there was a fountain, and we shared our vows, and then we walked across the street to Pioneer Park and cut our cake. And then, actually, oh no, that's going to be confusing. So then I just want to let you know that then no, we don't have a bunch of, like, sister wives now. And I've married 10 other people. No. But I did want to just say that that's what that looked like, huh? And then another one, and another one, and another one. No, but just to let you know, Tanya and I did officially get married in Santa Fe 2 years ago. Thank you. So easy. Once it's legal for you, $10 and a driver's license. I mean, who knew? It was like all that fighting for years, and it's like $10 and a driver's license. It was totally. Anyway, and the courthouse was beautiful, and two great people that live in Santa Fe were witnesses. So, all right. So these are not my sister wives, but these, like I said, I was raised in a Mormon, not in a fundamentalist Mormon faith. Fundamentalists are there are many polygamous groups that are fundamentalists. They all have different names, and there are probably 30,000 in Utah. And one group that was on the border of Arizona, and anyway, the Warren Jeffs group, they all moved to Texas. And he had he designed these dresses for the women, very particular dresses for them to wear. And I was able to buy them. It's a long story. The students got the story today, but I'm not going to go into it. This was a time when 400 children, I mean, Warren Jeffs is a nut job for sure. And you know, that kind of control and hierarchy and power over women and children is not okay. And so he's incarcerated, and that's all good. But you know, then the women are they're left alone, and their community's kind of splitting up. So I had this idea of reimagining this community of women and how they could take on the world and create their own rituals and their own ways of growing vegetables and their own ways of making art. So a lot of the work in the show that's here is with that in mind, is thinking about if these women had a community together and it was their own, what could they make from what they had around in their house? So I did originally some performances. All the sister wives, I call them, it sounds like ownership if I say my sister wives. These women are not fundamentalist Latter-day Saints. They are students or friends of mine that agreed to perform. And most of them have short hair, so I have to make these long braids that literally strap on to their neck. So the bow is holding on a big long braid that goes down the back. And then they get these kind of fantastic poofs. And you'll see a couple remnants of the poofs in the gallery space. So the first piece that we did together was at a gallery opening. That some of the pieces that are here were in there, these stitch images. And they were of iconic female performance artists, mostly from the 70s, 60s. And they're women that have really inspired my work, the way I think, thinking about visibility of women and thinking about using alternative spaces, because women, people of color, queer artists weren't even allowed to be we weren't given the shows in big museums. It was all men, just like our art history books. So a lot of very rich performance work and art out of these marginalized communities comes out of that time. And not necessarily in galleries or museums, but on street corners or in a park or somewhere else in a public space, because you had that. So you had your body and you had that space. So each of these women took on a very particular gesture of one of the performance artists that I was having them kind of channel. And so what they did for 2 hours was take the gesture of that famous performance piece, and they communicated with each other through those gestures. So it was kind of it was a language without, it was a communication without language, basically. It was a language of gesture. And then the sister wives, they got very hot, and so we went to Australia. We were in the Sydney Biennial. I had an installation there, and they wanted a performance, so I worked with some Australian artists, and I brought some of my graduate students from ASU, and the sister wives, we've also learned to line dance. We do a mean line dance. Like the electric slide, we kill it. And there's a little extra stomping in there. So then in these contexts, they would move through the space individually, listen to the walls, listen to the ground, kind of trying to hear something in the museum, not connecting to the artwork necessarily. And then they would find each other and find their dance partner, and then they all walk down these steps, and then they did, that's someone else's, that's all different international artists' work, but then they would just break out in a line dance. And there's no music, so it's just the sound of their feet, you know? But you have like 10 or 12 women all doing that in a space, and it's quite tribal. I mean, it's quite like boom, boom, boom. And that is kind of their communication. So we did line dancing, and we also had I choreographed a couples dance where it's kind of a waltz, and they're also kind of stomping like this. And they just cruised around the museum whenever they felt like it, doing this, not talking to people. It was amazing. They really commanded space. So I'm going to show you, documentation from live performances is never very good. It just doesn't, there are too many people around. So I'm going to show you a video now of a video that I made referencing the Sister Wife performances. Kicking Up Dust. That band I've worked with, they're called Happy Dirt. They're fabulous. They're great. Okay, so what's my time? How are we up for time?
7:05.
Okay, but we started late, right? Okay, just saying. Okay. All right, we're in good shape. So the sister wives, I want to explain, this work coming up here with these bonnets, these pioneer bonnets, and then also the sister wives. So I did grow up Mormon, very strict household, polygamy on both sides of the family. My great-great-grandfather was a prophet, and so because of that, there was a lot of pressure on our family. My father was a bishop as well. It was very strict upbringing. Although my mom was a little subversive. She was always challenging. Actually, she had me in junior high write a report on the ERA. So, I mean, I'm like, ERA, like kids are writing stuff, like not that. But I think in ways she knew I was creative, and she subtly pushed me in directions that would be fulfilling for me. She also really challenged the fact that boys were always acknowledged in the congregation for the things that they did, and girls were doing just as much work. And she would go right up to the top to whoever's making those decisions. She's like, "Don't you think that's unfair? It's gonna change, right?" I mean, she would just hound that person's office, and it did. It changed. So she, in terms of lineage, like a matriarchal lineage, my mom, although she was a Mormon mom, she also found ways to like see in between things. And I think she's the reason why I understood that everything's not exactly as it's being presented, or doesn't have to be. So I, as a queer kid and a creative kid, I was like totally stifled in that, and I wasn't a very good Mormon girl. A lot of keggers in the mountains, just saying. So I kind of rebelled a lot. And then I went away to school, and I really never thought I would ever return to Utah, and I certainly was not going to talk about my Mormon background. That's a buzzkill at a party. So, it's like, oh, where are you from? Utah. I was born in California, and then my family moved to Chicago, so I could just bypass a good 15 formative years. And so people I went to college with, to this day, they're like, "What is all this stuff? You're Mormon? Oh, you didn't say anything." I'm like, "I know." It was like horrible. I was shamed out by it. And I was angry a little bit. So anyway, long story short, I tried to find my own history by living in Italy for 6 years and find a more exotic and dramatic one. And then eventually I came back to the States and realized and really faced the fact that, my family history is my family history. It's in the fiber of my body. It's something you can't run from. It is you. I could do something with it. So I started really looking at the construct of women within polygamist households. And I was really, I was drawn in by the fact that early Mormon women used to speak in tongue. There was a group of all women. They would speak in tongue, and then there was a scribe who would respond and write down what was being said, which is that's very particular. And the early parts of Mormonism were very mystical. There, the hat, I don't know if you know much about Joseph Smith, but like there's a hat and some seer stones, and he's having visions, and there's all this kind of like amazingly creative, some people might say mad, but quite creative. It just sounds like performance art to me, really. So that's the stuff that Mormons now don't really talk about. So I just want to make it clear that I wasn't raised fundamentalist, but my relatives were all old school polygamists. So as a queer person in the world, I also found that because that's a non-heteronormative construct of family, right? You've got one man, you've got 5 wives, and 20 children. So that construct, it seems kind of similar to my place, wanting to marry my partner, it not being legal. Like those marriages aren't legal. The 5 other wives aren't legal in a polygamous household. So I finally found a place that I could kind of meet my history in a way that I sort of had more compassion for it in some way. And I also realized that a lot of the women were not ever acknowledged, because as soon as polygamy was deemed illegal in the state of Utah, because they had to become a state, okay, you've got one wife, the rest of your family, what's going to happen to them? Where do they go? Like you just don't take care of the 5 other wives and the children that you've been with. Like that's why everyone just moved off the grids. That's why you have communities in many like off the grid places. So that became very interesting to me. So I started doing research, and I found my great-great-grandfather had he had 9 wives, and we knew who the prophet relative was because he was like the superstar, right? Who the prophet. But we didn't know any of the women's names. I didn't know who was my great-great-grandmother. No one ever talked about her. So I went and I studied all the names of the women, who they were, how many children they had, and we come from Eleanor. So like even just understanding like how come no one ever talked about that? That invisibility I wanted to bring into a conversation. So I've been creating pioneer bonnets covered in tens of thousands of pearl corsage pins that stand in for all the wives of this grouping or all the wives of my great-great-grandfather. And it's the only series that has stayed together. Otherwise, then I'm working on a Joseph Smith series, and he had 35 wives, so it takes a lot longer. And then there's a Brigham Young series of 17 and under. There were some really young wives. So the idea is to, and they get named who their name was, not their last name, but their first name. And that feels really important as well, to be naming them, especially in the studio. If I have a big show coming up and I have to make a bunch, we're sort of calling out who's working with Carol Ann today, and who's working with Emma Hale, and so we're kind of, they come into conversation, these women's names, and that feels important. There were 2 sisters that my great-great-grandfather married, these 2. So they have just 2 little pink pearls on their hats to kind of show the sort of gene pool. These are made after sort of traditional, you can't really see the pearls very well, but they are corsage pin pearls. And corsage pins are used for what? Corsages. What events? Quinceañeras, all the ritualistic, all the rites of passage, all these kind of like important moments, and so they're an interesting object because they're pretty. That's why I've decided to work with them, is because they're pretty on one side and then they're actually quite dangerous on the other, because the steel is really like it can go through your skin, not just prick it, but it can really go through your skin. With some of the better made ones, some of the other ones I'm getting are not as good. But that the duality in just that object interests me. The tension of something that can really hurt you and something that is really beautiful. So, and I think part of that is my kind of conflict with my history. Part of me likes to fantasize about like an all women's group, commune somewhere, or thinking even about a patriarchal polygamous family, and but it's mostly women and kids and whatever, but the people calling the shots are not women. So I use tens of thousands of them. The only thing really different in terms of the form of these is that the straps, I just started making them longer and longer and longer and longer, and that really stands in for this the unruliness, the kind of imperfection, or something that kind of goes a little bit out of control, is leaving and kind of wandering, and so that's why they're so long. And here you can see a little better. So none of them are the same. It's the same form, but all of them have different designs. Every single one. People who aren't looking are like, "Oh, you're just doing more of those," and I'm like, they're different. So like every design is really different, and sometimes connects to the information that we know about the women. All of them have these circles right here. They're seer spots, so they're like seeing, like a seer, like a visionary person. So they all have those. That's the only thing that's consistent, and those sometimes change a little bit. And pedestals these are on, it's white oak, and it's what the hand carts that the Mormons created to walk to Utah, thousands of miles. They made hand carts because bodies could pull them, and then you didn't need to have horses to feed. So you weren't having horses to feed and bodies to feed. So they designed specifically a hand cart for the body to pull and push. And they were white oak, so that's why the white oak is there. And you'll see white oak in the gallery here as well. You can't really see the pearls. I don't know what's happening. How I'm moving on from the wives project with bonnets is I'm thinking about two of the bonnets coming together and merging, sort of converging or like intersecting in each other. And they all have titles from Karen Carpenter songs. Close to You is this one. And they lie down on pedestals. And the idea is that, you know, they're like in an embrace, or they're kissing, or they're somehow connecting to each other. And this one's called They Long to Be. So actually it's the same song, just a different line. And this is some more recent work, which is also going along with the idea of invisible women. And I just put up a solo show showing some of this 2 weeks ago in Phoenix. So it's all super, super new. And these are old, these are antique pantaloons. And when I lived in Italy, I used to wear them. I know, don't ask. I used to wear them like under dresses. It was all, I thought it was fashion. Anyway, it was kind of at the time. But I've had them, and I just started thinking like about these undergarment. They're not Mormon garments, just to clarify that, but they are some kind of intimate attire, but they're quite billowy. And so the designs on these are, I'm looking at artist women who were somewhat invisible. They're now getting a little bit of attention, but Emma Kuntz, Emma was Swiss, and all of her drawings were about healing. So, and she worked with sacred geometries, and she used a pendulum, and she made these incredibly abstract, exquisite designs and drawings that were to heal people. And then there's another woman, so I'm being inspired by her designs. So this idea of a healing design being back on the body. These are three-dimensional, they hang on the wall. They're much bigger than you think. Everyone that came to my show was like, oh, I thought they were gonna be little, but they're big. So it's a little bit bigger than life. And these are also pins, so I'm working with color again. There's another artist, Hilma af Klint. She is from Sweden, and some of the paintings I've been doing recently are also, and she also, they say that these two women were doing the first abstract work, but that's not what we know in art history. We know Kandinsky, we know Malevich, we know Mondrian, you know, abstract work, but they were making these abstract pieces before that. So this is another sort of body of work inspired by the invisibility of some women in history and then bringing them to the fore. Yeah. Okay, so I want to just end with talking about the Museum of Walking, because now you can kind of see that it doesn't just come out of nowhere. That this walking, you know, my family history of ancestors walking. I mean, I sang songs about Mormons walking across the plains growing up. I could sing one now, but I won't. You know, we were raised with this notion, you know, that our ancestors were just walked and walked and walked in long skirts and walked and walked and walked and walked, and then, you know, to their kind of Zion. So it is in the bones of my body, but the Museum of Walking started as an idea. Like, I love walking, my partner loves walking, I've done some walking drawings, and it's been in my work for a while. But I thought, you know, what is a Museum of Walking? And I turned my office space at ASU into the museum, 120 square feet. And it was to show my students that you could make something pretty incredible with really nothing, with a really shitty office, excuse me. I had a really shitty office, but I took the door off and put a glass door, and we did exhibitions. And the students could see the exhibitions, even if I wasn't there. The space was so small, they could see it through the door. And everyone hated this building we were in, and so that was important from a teaching standpoint. And then also people came. We had exhibitions of artists who use walking in their work. And these are, we're a museum that's dedicated to people, land, action, and sight. So obviously we know walking is good for us. It's good for us physically, like we know that. Like we're told we need to walk by our doctors all the time, right? But actually Stanford University just a few years ago came out with a research report that talks about walking inducing creative thinking and divergent thinking. And it's funny because a lot of artists that I know, like walk, they figure stuff out. Like if you're writing something and you can't, it's clogged, like you can figure it out. It's why the philosophers, they all walk, they paced. They thought that walking was thinking. So it's totally connected to the arts as far as I'm concerned. It also brings community together. I'll tell you a little bit more, but these are, when I asked students, why do you walk? These are some of the things they said. I love this one. So the Museum of Walking, we sometimes have a space to have exhibitions in, but sometimes we don't. It's okay. We're itinerant in that way. And our walks consist of contemplative full moon walks at night in some of the nearest desert hikes in, anyway, you don't know probably Phoenix, but we have some nice mountain ranges. So we walk there at night in silence, and there's not a lot of fanfare. People just arrive, and then I usually give a little bit of information about one artist that has usually been the image that we've used to advertise the walk. And I just give it, so it's like my little, like, subversive art history. They're not coming for a lecture. I don't want people to be like, oh, that lady just keeps talking, like I thought I came to walk. But I do give a little bit of information about walking and artists who engage walking. And then we also I started the museum with a native artist named Steve Yazzie. And so the two of us together with his Navajo background and my Mormon background, and there is a really contentious history there with, there's a pretty intense history between those two communities for sure. So we started talking about what does it mean to you to have a museum of walking. So the land, first people of the land is really important for us to consider. So some of our walks are someone taking us on a culturally significant walk somewhere, someplace. We did a walk up at Navajo Nation with a woman who grew up in Kayenta, and she talked to us about growing up there and she took us on her favorite walk of that place. Now, only like 3 people came. It was kind of a drive from Phoenix. But then we have some walks where 70 people, after the last election, we had a full moon walk, okay? And, in the beginning, there were 3 people that would show up to these things. And I thought, well, everything's free. It's all free. That's another thing that's really important to know, is that anyone can come and it's free. And a lot of the walks are accessible, wheelchair accessible. And so, I figured, well, if no one comes, I'll just walk anyway, no big deal. So it's a win-win. And then after the election, I started getting, people have to RSVP just so I know if I'm waiting for people. And the RSVPs started like piling in. The walk was like maybe 5 or 6 days after that day. And it was incredible, like more and more and more. It was out of control. And then like, I think 75 people showed up to walk in silence in a mountain range in Phoenix. And it was incredible because you could feel the energy in people's bodies, because it felt like a march in the beginning. And then as we kind of settled into the walk and kind of understanding each other's steps, it settled a little bit, which was really good. I particularly, my favorite walks are the contemplative, the silent walks. Some of my first silent walks were with Thich Nhat Hanh. They were peace walks. And those were life-changing for me. To understand in a really loud city that a group like 100 people could be walking for peace without signs or anything. It's just called a peace walk. And that the whole environment quiets down. And so, I realized from experience that was something pretty magical. We also have philosophers take us on walks and talk about certain philosophers that had a practice of walking. And then writers sometimes take us on walks in particular areas of the city. There was a walk to school, so all the writing prompts were like remembering your walk to school, and then they did a reading when they got to a park at the school. And this was an exhibition that happened in the very small space. There were a group of artists that were talking about the distance that people are willing to walk. So in other words, like urban planners and people who probably work in the health industry know that people will generally walk 15 minutes. Like that's it. To get a bus, to get a coffee, like that's sort of the limit. And it's like 15 minutes, like that just seems so strange. 15 minutes in Arizona in August is a very different 15 minutes than, somewhere else. It's gonna be a little bit cooler. So they did a project, these artists, they picked a point, which was the museum, and they each walked out a different diagonal exactly 15 minutes. They had clocks and everything. And then when they came back, they all did drawings responding to that walk that they had. So it became kind of an exploration of space, 15 minutes out in many different directions. And then we also did a walk down at the border to view a very important public art piece by the group Post Commodity. And they were basically putting up these eye balloons a mile, half mile on the US side and half mile on the Mexican side, which was a big, huge project for them. And so the Museum of Walking took a group down and we walked to the fence to see the balloons go up on both sides, which was an incredible experience to, we were mostly a white group walking, and, the Border Patrol stopped us and didn't ask for ID, they wanted to know if we felt safe and if we had water. I mean, we had great conversations on that walk. And how crazy this wall is, that, they're wild squash growing through, from the Mexican side, like over into the American side, like butterflies are going between this, nature happens, like people happen. So anyway, I'm not going to get too much, it might get too political. So we also have an archive and a library. Our motto is that we don't collect. Like, I don't want people's shoes that did the Camino. Everyone wants to give us their shoes that they walked in the Camino. I'm like, I don't want to take care of your shoes. I've got enough of my own. So the thing is, we only collect things that we can carry on our person for at least like 5 blocks. That's what Steve Yazzie and I decided on. We do have a very heavy typewriter, and this is what logs our books. And then our biggest walk is a walk that we do in a dried up riverbed in Phoenix. Beautiful space near South Phoenix. It's an economically underserved area. The river is somewhat dry, and then it became a waste dump. And now the Audubon Society's down there, and they've been trying to renew it, and now there are 200 bird species and beaver, and so we do a walk, almost 400 people. This is the only walk we charge for. It's just our fundraiser event. $25 a ticket, you get a really cute tote bag. And we have musicians in the riverbed that I work with. We have Some people are doing crystal bowls, some people mostly winds instruments. There are a couple violins and strings, and they are just playing. They wrote a score for the river. So it's this kind of experimental sound piece of you're hearing birds, you're hearing traffic, you're hearing the music, and everyone's silent. So it's an opportunity, we say it's an opportunity to disconnect in order to reconnect. So turn off the phones and stuff. Thank you everyone. You're an awesome audience. I'd love to take any questions if we have time. Do we?
On your sister's bonnets, the sear spots,
Yeah.
is there a Mormon history context to that?
Yeah. So did everyone hear the question? Yeah. So the sear spots come from the seer. There were apparently, and there are different stories about this, there were these stones that Joseph Smith had, that had two perfect holes in them. And that those were supposedly the ones he would put in a hat, and then put his head in the hat, and then have his revelations. You guys didn't know that? Yep, that happened. And then he had a scribe. He married a lot of women, but he married, for the most part in the beginning, literate, college-educated women. Apparently he may have been illiterate. So, I mean, they're his images and visions, and like it's very creative for sure. But the women were the ones that were scribing some of the time. So, and I'm going to give one little anecdotal thing. So there is one, you'll see when you go to the show, there are two tea towels that have two images on them, stitched on them. And then they have some black thread dripping from them. The one on the right is Eliza R. Snow, and she was my great-great aunt. She was the sister of the prophet. So she's the only woman you ever hear acknowledged in the faith. And I remember thinking, ooh, like even her name is in the hymn book. She wrote a hymn. She was a poet, not great poetry, but you know, I don't know what the deal was, but she was married to Joseph Smith, and then she was married to Brigham Young. So she had some real, something going on. She never had children. And that and the creative part is that she was a poet is interesting to me. And I think that's where I identify with her. But the story goes, and this is what my mom used to tell us, which is, I don't know why she was telling us, it was so brutal. But Eliza, my great-great aunt, she was one of the first sister wives of Joseph Smith. Now, the first wife of Joseph Smith was, and did anyone watch Big Love? Okay, so they did their homework, I'm just saying, you know, because I thought, oh, this is going to be, they had Mormons writing on the show and stuff. They did a very good job. So the first wife, Emma, she, you know, her husband was tarred and feathered. They've been chased out of a million towns, not a million, but a number of towns, always had to start community. They were very fast at making community. You know, it all goes, because they're really hard workers. I think that's also I have in my blood, hard work. But so she was like, look, I've been with you on these revelations, this one, that one, the polygamy thing and the new wives. No. She really was not down with that situation. She was verbal about it. And so then she discovered my great-great-aunt was living in their house. And I guess she looked pregnant or was pregnant. And so the first wife was like, oh my, this is happening. So the story goes, and there are many different stories, I did research on this in grad school, that one, she was chased out of the house by the first wife, tripped and fell and miscarried, and then never could have kids again. Another one was that she was dragged down the steps by her hair. That just sounds a little dramatic. And then miscarried. Either way, whatever happened, there was anger, there was a miscarriage, and then she never had any kids. Which also within that that community sort of, you know, I find that interesting. You know, she was a poet. It's like maybe that was the survival thing, the thing that she had that was hers. I was talking to students today about creativity being the thing no one can take away from you. And so maybe that was her creative outlet, like no one could take that from her. So that's a little bit more than the seer story, but it's a good story, right? Yeah.
So I'm curious about the visibility, invisibility theme that you're working, and how you're archiving these really beautiful pieces of art for posterity. Is the relationship with ASU taking any responsibility about that? Did you read the article in the New York Times about Judy Chicago and her archiving her body of work? And
When was that? When?
It was just recently.
Oh.
Just recently.
I'll look for it.
I can, yeah, but, so anyway, it's that whole archiving of bodies of work around women's art is sort of on my mind right now. And I'm wondering how you're doing those delicate, caring for those delicate pieces.
The grouping that you saw, actually, that's in the Phoenix Art Museum collection. So they're taking very good care of it. And it does go into other shows every once in a while. And other institutions have, you know, I feel like it's a great museums. I just know that it will be taken care of, and that I feel lucky about that.
It's big trust.
Well, I don't have all the storage space. And so I'm happy to know that it will be put into context and shown. Because I want it to be a conversation, not just, I don't want to just hold on to it. And then there are individual ones that private collectors have bought. And those, it makes me a little bit sad that they're separated. I'd like them all to be together, but it's sort of physically impossible because they take so long to make. I mean, there are hundreds of hours that go into them. So I try to archive as best as I can, and my work, and then also share information about these other women too. Yeah.
You mentioned referring to some of the premier female performance artists that you started in the 70s. Could you name them, a few of them, and just tell us why they're influential?
Yeah. The students this morning got inside scoop. Any of the students that were there remember the names? Come on. Linda Montano. She was very well known for art in the everyday, and she would do performances for year-long periods. Also, Adrian Piper, who was really a photographer, philosopher. Her work called Catalysis. And Valley Export. She was part of the Viennese Actionist group. Martha Rossler, photographer. Are any of these familiar? Yeah. And Carolee Schneemann, one piece called Up To and Including Her Limits, where she does the drawing in the space, trying to reach as far as she can. I think you have those three there. Carolee, in the gallery. Carolee, and then there's another image next to the female. Also, the images, it sort of nods to the documents that exist. Speaking of archive, that's interesting, because these performance pieces happened in, you know, sometimes not professional spaces. They happened maybe in public. They happened maybe at someone's house, because these women weren't allowed, they weren't invited to be in museums and galleries. So the audience, the photography, you know, a lot of those early performances, there's one image that survives. And if you teach it, it's like, you know, the one image of Adrian Piper. It's the, you know, and I started thinking about this because I noticed somewhere online that the image was backwards, or had I been teaching it backwards? So I put a call out, like, which way is it? Because, you know, if someone flips this, when we had 35mm slides, like if someone just flips that and scans it, that's suddenly how we know that image. I mean, it's very funny. Digital wouldn't happen that way. Trying to kind of bring back to life, to kind of reactivate that time, that piece, that gesture, I think. So the little stitch pieces next to the performances are the tools of translation. So they're the element or the object that they used in that performance that is sort of the conduit for something happening. back there. Hi.
The narrative.
Oh wait, were you at the coffee shop?
Hi.
Oh my goodness, where are all the rest of the ladies?
I don't know.
Wait, Wild Women Wednesday.
Wacky.
Oh, wacky. Sorry, it just felt wild to me. Do you guys know this group? Well, they're wacky and they're women and they get together on Wednesday and take up the entire coffee shop.
Wonderful.
Anyway, question.
So the narrative with which I am most familiar with Mormon women who leave the church is that of cutoff, emotional estrangement, being shunned and left behind. And so I'm so heartened to hear how you have, you discovered your, is it great-great-grandmother? And, was it 8 great-great-step-grandmothers?
Right, yeah.
And I'm curious.
They're all buried together. I went to their gravesite in Utah. Yeah, the prophet has a big sort of column thing. And then all the women's names, just their first names on tombstones.
Well, I'm curious whether you've followed the generations and done a genealogy and found living relatives and connected with them.
Not so much. I did do one when I was doing research. I did go into, because the more LDS faith has a great genealogy, collection, whatever you want to call it. But when I went into one to look up the full lineage, it got a little awkward because someone saw who I was looking up, and then it was a conversation, and then the woman was like, you look like her. It just got really, I was like, whoa, I just want to find the lineage. She was up for, it's like the prophet thing. I'd be very hot in the Mormon faith if I went back. Because it's like, you drop those names, and it's like, whoa. I mean, maybe it's why I get away with doing the work I do. But also, it's not angry work. It's more of a dialogue, I think. So, yeah, I'll try to be brave and go back. I sent one of my assistants in to go and do it.
Well, and how many of them have left the church? How many of the living ones are still in the church? And would, the LDS researchers might not want you to get that far and know that.
Maybe.
Et cetera, et cetera.
Well, yeah, none of my immediate family is practicing Mormon now. We moved from Utah to Chicago, and that was it. That we had to leave the state. So, and that was really interesting. I mean, I'd already was going away to college, and I was like, well, that's cool. They're like, yeah, we might drink wine. Oh, and, you don't have to hide your cigarettes as long as I don't smoke anymore, thank God. But outside, I was like, who are you people? It was literally leaving the state because there were too many eyes on them or something. And I think they didn't want to hurt family members too. So none of my immediate family is practicing, but we were all on the register. We were all members listed, and we just didn't bother to do it. But my mom asked this last year. She said, for my birthday, will you all write in and have your name removed from the member list because they're counting our numbers? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we did it. We love our mom. It wasn't a big deal, but.
Well, that makes me wonder how distorted the Mormon membership numbers are. Take that by several hundred.
They baptize for the dead. So those numbers are counted. I know, my partner's like, I can't believe they're baptizing Jews. And they're dead, they didn't have a choice. Anyway, I think maybe, is that, one last question, anyone itching? Yeah.
So, do you have a studio where people are helping you with the tremendously detailed work that you're doing?
Yeah, I have a touch of the carpal tunnels. Really. I have a studio. The assistant situation kind of goes in and out. but I have 2 women I've been working with that are great, and one who moved to Durham, North Carolina. So in a pinch, I fly her out because she can pin like nobody's business. She's just like dynamo. She loves it. You also have to love it. She makes work. She's a fiber artist, so she like loves it. Someone who isn't into like repetition and doing and isn't a little bit OCD will just hate it. It's just, you know, so why bother? So if you're into it, like, I find a spot for you. And so the most I've ever had was when I was working on the show for Sydney, Australia, and a lot of those pieces had to be made quickly. And so there were probably 5 or 6 of us working in a circle in my studio on these, you know, talking about the woman, and we had some information, and we would read those aloud. You know, it was really interesting. Yeah. Anyone else? The lights are going to come back on. Okay, thank you guys.